Hi guys, Tracy here from Red Wind Studio. It's been a while since I've done sort of a tutorial type video, so I thought I'd do one this morning. Since I'm not going to be working on any projects until I find a new place and get moved, I don't want to half start something and it get damaged or something and have to start all over again. So I thought I'd talk to you about sandpaper today. There's all different kinds of sandpaper, there's different grits of sandpaper, and typically when you're working with furniture and refinishing it or restyling it, you need to know those different types of sandpaper to get the finish right and to do your prep right. So I typically use 3 different grits of paper. So I just grab my boxes here because I usually buy it in fairly large packages. So there is the, I know this is going to be backwards for you guys, 100 grit, and that is considered medium. It's still fairly rough. Sometimes I'll use 80 grit depending on how bad the finish is. This is for prepping. So for example, I'm going to strip a piece down. After I finish stripping it and scraping all the goop and gunk off of it and cleaning it, then I need to sand it because there's still going to be some stain and some residues left, and I need a heavier grit sandpaper to get in there and get all of that out. So typically I would use a 100 grit for that, and I have my little handy dandy bucket here that I keep my sandpapers in, because I don't throw them out right away because they usually last a while. So I don't know how well you can see how heavy a grit that is on there, but that's the 100, and typically I'll use that after I've finished stripping a piece. If I don't want to strip it and there is loose paint, loose varnish, anything like that, then I'll use this as well. This is a great prep sandpaper for pieces that are in pretty bad shape. Okay, then I've got my 220, and that's pretty fine. This is typically what I use pretty much all the time. If your piece is in fairly good shape, I'll use the 220 grit to do my prep, so to do my light sanding, and also when I'm doing distressing after my paint is dry and I want to do a bit of a reveal and make it look distressed, I will use the 220 grit for that. I also like to sand my paint after it's dry and smooth it out a bit. Whether I'm going for more of that country cottage, more rusticy feel where you can see the brush strokes and you want to create a bit of patina, so you want the brush strokes there and for the dark waxes to sit in there to create that patina, I will still give it a light sanding just to smooth it out so it's not quite as rough feeling. I don't want my finish to feel like sandpaper. I want it to be fairly smooth to the touch. Having the texture of the brush strokes is fine, but I don't want it to feel rough. So I will use the 220 for that quite often. That's my typical go-to. And then there is, and these are both dry, the 2 that I talked to you about, the 100 and the 220, those are only dry sandpapers. You cannot wet those, it'll damage the paper. Then we move on to the 600 grit, and oh, hold on, before I move on to that, I want to show you, let me find, okay, so that is, this is the 220, let's see if I can get this up here. If you can see the difference between that, and let me grab the 100. I don't know if that shows up on the camera okay or not to see the difference in the grit there. But, so that's the 220. And then we move on to the 600. So 600 is super fine. There are papers that are finer than the 600. But I typically work with the 600. It usually is fine enough to provide the finish that I want. So this is for wet sanding, so it can be immersed in water. It won't degrade the paper at all. And this is for typically when you're doing your finishing and you're using a polyurethane or a clear coat. So typically you'll put on a couple coats of your clear coat, and then you'll use your 600 grit. Because if you feel your surface after you've put your clear coat on after staining or painting, and you run your hand along it, it's going to feel a little bit rough. If it's the wood, if you've stained it, the pores are going to open up and it's going to feel a little bit like sandpaper. So the 600 grit will alleviate that and get rid of it and give you that super smooth, nice finish that you want. So it'll feel like it was professionally done. So 600 is great. I'll show you. So that's it there. It hardly has any feel of grit to it at all. For any of you girls that get your nails done and your nail lady uses an emery board on your nails to smooth them out, it's probably around a 600. When they're shaping your nails, it wouldn't be that. It would be a much heavier, but it's sort of the same principles. The shaping is done with a heavier emery board, which is sandpaper, and then when they're doing the polishing and the buffing on the top of your nail, they're using something more along the 600 grit. So that's a great example for comparison. So those are the sandpapers that I typically use. Now a little bit of other instruction. As you can see, like the boxes show how big, that is one sheet. So that is one full sheet, and the pieces that I was showing you are about a quarter of that. So I never try to use a whole sheet. That's just way too big to deal with. So I fold it in half, tear it in half, and then fold it again and tear it again so that you get 4 pieces out of the one sheet. You always, and then I fold it in half and I use it like this. You want to keep your sandpaper flat. No crumpling. That's bad. No crumpling. It's a pet peeve of mine. If you crumple your paper, you're going to create edges in it and it's going to gouge and score your furniture. So do not crumple. If you have an issue with crumpling your paper, then you need to get yourself a sanding block. And quite often, if I'm doing long tabletops or nice flat surfaces where there's no detail or anything, I'll use this as an old sanding sponge. It's all worn down, and I will just wrap my sandpaper around it like that, and there you go. You have a nice sanding block. A piece of wood, anything flat and rectangular or square that you can wrap your paper around that's a good size. The old sanding blocks are great, and you can get those at the dollar store. Somebody had given me a pack of them, and they certainly don't last very long. They wear out really, really quick. So I suggest don't invest in always buying sanding sponges from the dollar store. Go to the actual hardware store, get good sanding sponges. I do sell sanding sponges as well. This is a wet dry, so this is medium to fine. So this is sort of in between the 220 and the 100. So this is great for prepping to do your scuff sanding on your furniture before you paint and doing your smoothing out and distressing as well. And you can immerse it in water and clean it out afterwards, get rid of all the dust out of it. So this is a great sanding sponge for that purpose. Works really, really well. And when it wears out, if you have sandpaper, you can always use it as a sanding block and wrap your paper around it. So that's a little bit of information about sanding. Now, for those of you that have never sanded a piece of furniture or a piece of wood before, I'm going to give you a couple little pointers. Some of you already know this, some of you don't. So these are for the beginners that don't know anything about wood and about furniture. So we're going to pretend that this is the top of a dresser or the side of a dresser or whatever. So this is your wood. It has a clear coat or a varnish or whatever over top of it, and you want to prep it, you want to paint it. So as you can see, there's a little bit of shine to this. So it does have a polyurethane on it that I added. And when you're going to sand, can you see that okay? I'm gonna bring it up really nice and close. So you always sand in the direction of the grain. You do not go across the grain. So what I mean by that is, if you see here, see how the grain is running like this through the wood? It's not running this way. It's running this way. Can you all see that? So when you're sanding, you're gonna wanna sand like this. You do not sand like this, okay? Especially if you're going to be stripping it down, or if you've already stripped it down and then you're sanding it, preparing to restain it. Do not sand it this way. You always want to sand it this way. You sand across the grain and you're going to see it, it's going to scratch it, it's going to tear it all apart, and you're going to make a great big mess, and you're going to have to sand the heck out of it to fix that. So make sure that you're always sanding in this direction. And if you've stripped it and you want to prep it for stain, you're going to, once you've got all the old stuff off of it, and you're still going to see that there's still little bits here and there, some stain, maybe some varnish still stuck on it. You're going to go to your 80 or 100 grit, and you're going to sand it until all of that is gone. And then you're going to come in with a finer grit sandpaper. Maybe like a 180. You can go up to the 220. I usually go in between and then finish with the 220 and then stain. If it is a really hard wood like maple or something, sometimes you don't want to go as fine as a 220. Sometimes that closes it up too much and it makes it hard for the stain to go in. If you're just planning on painting, then this is fine. 220 grit, give it a scuff sand, just break up that shine a little bit, clean it off, and then you can go ahead and paint. So that is my little tutorial on sandpaper. If you guys have any questions, go ahead, you can message me. You can post a question on my Facebook page. Come into the store and ask. I'm here. I'm always willing and able to answer your questions for you, and always love to. So I want your projects to be a success, and that's what I'm here for, is to help you achieve that. So it is Sunday. I'm opening at 12. I'm here from 12 till 5. So if you have any questions, you know where to find me, and you guys have a wonderful Sunday. Thanks, guys.